It took around an hour to refill Toby's bunker as we had to do it by hand, but once we were done we made a plan to head up towards Tidmouth since it was a common gathering place among the engines. As we traveled down the main line we couldn't shake the era feeling of silence that surrounded us. Normally we'd be able to hear the sound of happy people chatting or engines chuffing cheerfully along, but now it was silent. We were the only ones roaming the rails. As we pulled into Tidmouth, Tom went into the station to search for any people or food. As we waited we saw tons of luggage that had been left behind. To my knowledge Daisy was scheduled to be here, so I can only assume the people ran for the coaches at the first sign of trouble. As Tom exited the station with some stale buns we noticed the sound of talking coming from the yard. We backed Toby from the platform, and the workmen swapped the points. We pulled into the yard and saw several trucks in our way, so we pushed them to reveal an exhausted Thomas, Spencer, and a petrified Donald. The three engines were shocked to see us, but were happy nonetheless. We quickly questioned them and Spencer revealed that he was sitting at Knapford with the Duke and Duchess of Boxford and Thomas with Annie and Clarabelle. As Thomas was waiting he saw a rather sick-looking man. He didn't question it as he knew there was some sort of illness going around. Just as he looked away the sick man jumped onto a nearby civilian and began attacking him. The people on the platform panicked and got into the coaches. The guard blew his whistle and they set off. They looked back to see he hadn't been coupled to the coaches, however it was too late as more people, who were in the same condition as the sick man, had entered the coaches and began attacking those within. They tore down the main line faster than he ever had before. He saw people being attacked down in the old harbor and lower Tidmouth. As they rounded the bend into Tidmouth they saw Daisy at the platform on his line. Spencer blew his whistle and shut his eyes preparing for the crash but felt a sudden swerve as he was sent into the yard. They opened their eyes to see Daisy speed off down the line. A few minutes later Donald rolled in and hadn't said a word. We looked at the pannier, but kept silent mumbling to himself. Tom checked their cabs but found no sight of their crews. Thomas said that his crew and Spencer's crew had gone off to search the building for supplies and had no idea where Donald's could be. Just then the sounds of gunshots echoed from the nearby building and there we saw Bob and Ted leap from the building with a massive crowd of zombies on their tails. They jumped into Thomas' cab and quickly began to fire him up. Ted took aim and shot into the crowd, taking down as many of those creatures as possible. Thomas' face began to grow red and a loud hissing sound was heard. It was the sound of a dry boiler being steamed. Thomas soon began leaking steam and screamed in pain. Spencer looked towards Donald and yelled for him to help, but he just sat there still filled with fear. I knew too well what was going to happen and quickly set Toby into reverse. However, Tom ran towards the tank engine in an attempt to help, but it was too late. I thought for a second the plugs in the crown sheet would prevent anything major from happening, but just as I said this Thomas boiler dented in on itself one final time before it exploded. Boiler tubes and boiling hot steam was sent everywhere, killing the nearby zombies along with Tom. Once the dust settled we saw Donald racing away back down the line covered in Thomas' blood. His crew had been hiding amongst the trucks and took the explosion as a distraction to make their escape. We stayed at Tidmouth for several hours to mourn the losses. We laid the bodies of Bob, Ted, and Tom out and covered them with tarps. We also tried to gather the remains of Thomas and Spencer, however we couldn't grab many pieces due to their heat. It was nighttime by the time we finally left and Toby remained quiet. He hadn't said a word since Thomas blew up. To this day I still miss Thomas. Even though he got on everyone's nerves, he didn't deserve that sort of fate. He truly deserved better. We all do. We pulled into Tidmouth sheds to spend the night, and there we found Gordon and Percy along with a bunch of workmen as safe as could be. We were ecstatic to see he was okay. Gordon had been pulling the express train from Brendam, and as he was passing Wellsworth he saw the people on the platform being attacked. He made his way to Crosby where he picked up Percy and several workmen and civilians and made a beeline to the sheds. They claimed to have passed Daisy, and as they pulled into the goods shed he saw Spencer and Thomas rush by. They hoped they were all right. Percy then looked at Toby and asked if he was all right, referring to the blood covering the side of his face and side tanks. We were forced to break the news of Thomas and Spencer's deaths to Gordon and Percy, and they didn't take it too well. Gordon lashed out at us saying we could have saved them. We tried to explain that if we did we would have been killed like Tom, but he didn't want to hear it and stayed quiet the rest of the night. I just backed Toby into the sheds with Henrietta so they could get some rest. As I did I could hear Percy quietly crying to himself.